Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ashley Lelling. I'm the Participant Experience Manager for InterExchange's outbound programs for U.S. citizens. And I also manage our Christianson Fellowship, which is the subject of today's webinar. And we're really excited to have former Christianson Fellow Minnie Jang with us today. She's going to share a bit about her really interesting project in Peru. But first, I'm going to go over a little bit of background about InterExchange, excuse me. So for those of you who don't know who InterExchange is, we are a nonprofit organization based in New York City. Our mission is to promote cross-cultural understanding through experiential volunteer and work abroad programs. And we've been dedicated to this endeavor since 1968. Our Christianson Fellowship is named in honor of InterExchange's co-founder, Uta Christianson. The fellowship supports young U.S. citizens who are passionate about contributing to and engaging with a community abroad and who are eager to learn about local culture as well as share American culture. Fellows independently arrange a volunteer service project abroad for at least 6 months. And when I say independently, I just mean that fellows are not paying a program provider to join an organized volunteer trip. Many fellows will actually approach an organization and ask if they have any intern or volunteer opportunities. Some will even approach an organization with a specific project proposal. The award is meant to cover a fellow's living expenses while abroad, and it can also go towards any project materials as well as flights to and from the host country. Awards range from $2,500 to $10,000. The grant selection committee carefully reviews the budget fellows submit with their application, and they'll consider things like cost of living in the host country, project duration, in order to determine the final amount that the fellow will receive. In terms of the types of service projects we support, it's a wide range. Past fellows have focused on multiple international issues, including public health, environmental conservation, legal advocacy, female empowerment, and poverty alleviation, among other topics. There are so many issues deserving of attention, and we seek to support diverse young people with various interests. So we have purposely not created specific project categories or types. To be eligible for the Christianson Fellowship, you must be a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident and be between the ages of 18 and 28 at the time of your project start date. You must be participating in a volunteer or intern project abroad on site for at least 6 months. And the reason that we have a minimum duration of 6 months is because we think it's going to take at least that amount of time to really be able to build relationships with the local community and to really be able to learn more about the issue on the ground as well as the host community. The fellowship does not support independent research, academic credit, or study abroad. We are one of the few funding opportunities that doesn't require student status or recent student status. So here's what we look for in our fellows. Number one is motivation. You should demonstrate your interest or passion in the service project. For example, have you studied sustainable agriculture in school and now you want on-the-ground experience? Or perhaps you volunteered for an organization working on a similar issue here in the US and now you'd like to learn about that issue and what's being done to work on it in another country. We're also looking for fellows who have a specific skill set to contribute to the community abroad. Wanting to help and being able to help are two different things. So let us know what experience or skills that you will contribute. And to give you an example, one of our recent fellows has volunteer experience facilitating dialogues, which she is going to use to apply to her service project at a prison in South Africa, where she'll help facilitate dialogues between victims and offenders. We're also looking for fellows who are goal-oriented. In the fellowship, we'll ask you to provide your project goals and also explain how you're going to measure them. And we support fellows who can show how their project is going to positively impact their host community. And ideally, the project should relate to a fellow's future plans. Lastly, we're looking for young people who will represent InterExchange and the US well. You'll serve as an ambassador, and we want to support individuals who are excited to learn about the host culture as well as share American culture. And here's what we're looking for in the service projects. First and foremost, it must benefit the host community. For example, one of our recent fellows helped start a tailored training and farming project for marginalized communities in Malawi. Her income and nutrition projects fulfilled a vital need and had a direct impact on the host community. Projects should also be sustainable in that the benefits don't end when the fellow leaves. So this could mean that others are going to carry on the project when a fellow leaves, or the knowledge or training that's provided is enduring. Of course, we also hope your environment is, your project is environmentally sustainable as well. We also want to ensure that the organization the fellow is working with is a reputable one. It should be well respected and established in the community. We certainly don't want to support a fellow associated with an organization that the locals don't respect. Lastly, we'll also examine your project for feasibility. For example, are your project goals feasible given the duration? And is the location safe for you to even carry out your project? Next, I'm going to highlight some of our former Christianson fellows to illustrate the diversity of individuals and projects we support. Gabriela Page spent 12 months in Peru to help support their mobile tuberculosis screening vehicle. Peru has one of the highest reported TB incidence rates in the Americas. And in impoverished neighborhoods where Gabby volunteered, they often lack access to quality health care. The mobile screening vehicle went directly to these communities, and the screening technology was able to predict the probability that a person had TB in just 10 to 15 minutes. So Gabby's project directly impacted the host community, serving a vital need. And Gabby was fluent in Spanish, and she had a degree in public health, two skills she used to support her on this service project. In a very different project across the world, David Cotton contributed to a project supporting refugees in Greece. He had initially spent 6 months volunteering with a local NGO in Athens, which was running a refugee shelter and a community center. And from that experience, David knew he wanted to return to help address refugees' employment and integration struggles. As many of you probably know, there are millions of people fleeing war and famine across Northern Africa and the Middle East, and many of them pass through Greece, where they face steep employment barriers. So what David did was he collaborated with the local NGO that he already had a relationship with to help launch 2 refugee-run businesses. One was a salon and the other was a shop selling handmade goods crafted by refugees. And David already had extensive experience in operations management, so he used his business background to help this project. Tiffany Brown, another very different project. She was volunteering in a marginalized community in the Dominican Republic, where she taught Spanish literacy and designed youth development programs. Prior to her Christianson Fellowship, Tiffany had spent 2 years teaching in Colombia, where she gained fluency in Spanish. And the organization where Tiffany spent her Christianson Fellowship was so happy with her service that they actually hired her afterward to continue developing youth programs. So as you can see, the fellows and the projects that we support are diverse, and we're always really excited to read applications and learn about how young people in the US want to support and learn from communities abroad. The application is completely online. You can access it from our site, which I've included the URL at the bottom of this slide. The application entails details about your project. For example, tell us what are you going to be doing, where, which organization you're volunteering with, your project goals, and how you'll measure them. We'll also ask you to provide a budget that details your airfare, your living costs in the country, any passport or visa costs, and it's totally fine if these are estimated costs at the time of your application. There's also an essay in which we'll ask you to address specific prompts, and we require 2 letters of recommendation on official letterhead. Recommender should be someone who can speak to your character, so a current or former employer or a teacher or even a mentor. We don't care about your GPA. What we care about is your character and your ability to follow through on the project that you are proposing. We also require a 1-page resume just to get a sense of your experience, as well as a copy of your US passport or permanent resident card to ensure you meet the eligibility criteria. There is a $50 application fee, and this covers the administrative costs of reviewing applications. We offer 3 application cycles every year, March 15th, July 15th, and October 15th. You're welcome to apply in advance, even up to 1 year before your slated project date. That's perfectly fine. And you can apply if your project has already started, but we prefer that you haven't been on your project for more than a couple months at the time of application. And we don't review applications on a rolling basis, but if, let's say, you apply January 1st, we'll confirm receipt, but we won't actually review your application until the next deadline, which would be March 15th. And we are still accepting applications, even though we are still in the midst of a pandemic. We understand that travel dates can only be estimates right now, but we are still offering the fellowship, and our next deadline is July 15th. Okay, so now I just want to go over a brief timeline so anyone who's interested in applying has a sense of what to expect. As I mentioned, we have 3 application deadlines every year. Any fellow that's been selected for an interview will be notified 2 weeks after the application deadline. The interview is conducted by me. We'll have a video call to learn more about you and your project. And then you will learn acceptance 6 to 8 weeks after the deadline that which you applied for. And the way we disperse the grant is in 2 installments. The first one is shortly after your project starts, once we confirm with your supervisor. And then the last disbursement is within 30 days of your end date once you complete the completion report, which is a reflection on your service abroad. All right, now I want to introduce Minnie Jang. Minnie was so gracious to be with us today. She's in the middle of finals in med school, so we really appreciate her time. Minnie received a Christianson Fellowship in 2018 for her 8-month service project in Peru. And Minnie, thank you so much for being here today. Please feel free to turn on your mic. Yeah, we're really happy to be with you, for you to be here with us. And to start with, can you tell us a little bit about your project in Peru? For example, like the skills you were using on this project?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to kind of virtually meet everyone. So my project, the organization that I worked with is actually the same one that Gabby, who was on her picture was on the slide a couple slides ago, worked with in Lima, Peru. It's called Socios en Salud, and it's a subsidiary of a larger international NGO called Partners in Health. Like was mentioned, PIH does a lot of work in TB in the area of Lima. I think that's the majority of the projects, but the smaller subgroup that I worked with was specifically focused on maternal and child health. So my project specifically was called Saname, which was a kind of multi-pronged, holistic maternal child health community-based intervention that really aimed to improve a lot of different kind of domains of women's well-being. So we had kind of goals for clinical follow-up of pregnant women who were enrolled at the start of their pregnancy, and we kind of did close follow-up over the course of their pregnancies through postpartum. Some of our specific goals there were to try and increase the number of prenatal healthcare visits that women were attending, increase adherence to folic acid supplementation and iron supplementation and those are for combating anemia in pregnancy and improving fetal health, and then also improving health literacy. So those are some of the clinical goals, and the other prongs of this project focused on access to mental health resources, and also kind of improving the economic well-being of women who were in the intervention. So it was a pretty neat for the latter part. We actually held these knitting workshops for women and started this cooperative really that was kind of run by the group of women who participated, where they would teach each other how to knit and create these products that they could then sell and generate revenue from. And that was the goal, was to kind of increase economic independence for those who were in the project. And some of the skills that I contributed really centered on some of the research experience that I'd gained from college. I helped out a lot with basic sort of data analysis, statistical analysis, especially towards the end of the project as we were kind of creating reports and gathering all the data to present to donors. I also did a lot of writing while I was there, whether from grant proposals to protocols to, again, reports for donors. I think a lot of that, there was more of that than I was expecting, but I felt like it was a role that I kind of filled well, and I felt like my coworkers and others at the organization appreciated the ability to kind of translate between English and Spanish and do a lot of the writing. And then I would say the last kind of major skill was that translating, not only when it came to kind of written reports and things like that, but also a lot of times donors would come and visit from different countries. Well, I guess from the United States, because I could translate from English. So me, along with some of the other volunteers, would help kind of oversee and navigate those visits. Sorry for the long-winded response.
No, that was wonderful. It was such a comprehensive project, so it's interesting that it had so many different facets to help women, and it's also great that there was an initiative led by them to bring them together with the knitting cooperative. And I'm the administrative role that you fill, like the data analysis, I know sometimes to some people that may seem like not sexy because it's not, direct contact necessarily with the beneficiaries, but that type of support for an organization is so important. And the fact that you had training and could bring those skills is so helpful to an organization. I think it's really important for anyone who's considering volunteering abroad to know that those administrative roles are really important and can do a lot to help an organization. Yeah. So Minnie, how did you first become interested in public health?
I think it started in college. I remember being a sophomore, and I took this one kind of introductory course on kind of broadly global health, and it really focused on defining social determinants of health. And I think that was my first real introduction to that concept. It was actually taught by Paul Farmer, who is the founder of Partners in Health, the organization I worked with in Peru, and some other kind of big global health names at my school. So that was really cool cool and inspiring, I think, hearing firsthand about their work and how they have played a big role in kind of transitioning the field of global health into its current kind of era was really interesting and compelling to me. And I think the idea of social determinants of health pull together a lot of my interests. I always saw myself going into medicine as a field because I thought it was the intersection of kind of the sciences and the humanities, which is where I felt like my interests really lie. And to me, public health and global health really emphasize a kind of that intersection again. It brings together all these kind of different components and factors that impact people's health and well-being, whether that's culture, social factors, historical and political factors. And so I really enjoyed studying that in college and wanted to apply that to my future career in medicine and hopefully in sort of a realm of global health, as well as what I did over my gap year.
That's interesting. It's kind of full circle that Paul Farmer was one of the professors, and now you had this experience with the organization he founded.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. And Minnie, what motivated you to volunteer abroad as opposed to maybe volunteering here in the U.S. working on a public health initiative?
Sure. I think I had a few different reasons. The first was that I knew that I was starting med school soon, and medicine's a long kind of road of training. So I did kind of want to do something a little out of my comfort zone, a little different, and also, you know, enjoy my gap year. And I think I had a really wonderful gap year, and was ready to kind of start med school once I got there. I also wanted to apply a lot of what I'd learned in college, and I had studied Latin America through my major, and through my thesis. My senior thesis was focused on the kind of looking at the experiences of women and their trauma in the aftermath of Peru's period of internal armed conflict at the end of the 20th century. And so I studied that really in depth during my senior year and had studied a lot of themes around kind of race and culture and revolution while learning about Latin American history and literature in college. And so I really wanted the opportunity to kind of spend a more extended period of time in Latin America, specifically Peru, and kind of apply some things that I had learned and continue to learn. And then my last reason was really that I had gained a lot of kind of diverse experiences working with NGOs in the United States up until that point. I had worked kind of with more advocacy focused groups. I had worked with actually Partners in Health, their branch in Boston. They have like kind of a grassroots community organizing branch. And so I had seen a lot of the work from that side, but kind of I really wanted to experience field work on the ground in a community setting, working with local organizations. And I knew I could really only do that by going abroad.
Great. Yeah, that's a great point about, you know, even if you can do a similar experience here in the US, but you gain so much perspective when you go abroad to learn how another community is dealing with a particular issue. And you answered my next question, which was, you know, how did you prepare before going abroad? And what you said was so important, and which we advocate for anyone interested in volunteering abroad, is to really take the time to learn about the history of the place that you're going, as well as the current context. Many issues, particularly health, are complex and multi-layered, so it's really important to prepare yourself like Minnie did for her project before you even go abroad. And with that said, though, Minnie, was there anything that you learned about the local culture that you didn't know before you were on the ground in Peru?
Yes, the kind of, I guess, strongest example that comes to mind was learning about the impact and the influence of traditional Andean beliefs among, I guess, communities in general. The organization Socios en Salud is based kind of on the outskirts of metropolitan Lima, but it's comprised of a lot of people and communities that were displaced by the internal conflict. And so a lot of those people had come from different regions of the country. And I think they brought a lot of different or more traditional beliefs that impacted kind of health and our project in ways that I didn't expect. So the example I'm thinking of is with our knitting cooperative. There are actually some women who are in the project that didn't want to participate in that specific component because there is this one Andean belief that knitting during pregnancy can actually cause your fetus's umbilical cord to wrap around its neck and lead to fetal distress. So that was something I had not read about, hadn't come across and anything that I'd read or studied before, and was a little bit of a surprise, but I think a real learning experience for how to kind of navigate different cultural beliefs when it comes to promoting health in kind of local communities. But I think more than that, I think that's sort of a smaller example. I think the larger kind of broader themes of what I learned about maternal health in Peru are that it's kind of, my experience really just confirmed what I think is true about the reality of poverty around the world, and that's that systems and structural violence really make it so that impact people's health and well-being because of the way that things are institutionalized. So it's a very simple example. A lot of the women in our project had initially trouble accessing prenatal care, physically making it to their appointments because they lived too far away from some of the health centers. And I remember trekking up, mountains and hills just to get to folks' houses. And I couldn't believe the amount of distance that people had to travel just to make it to a health center. And Partners in Health is really promotes community health workers as a big kind of asset in that area. So we worked with wonderful community health workers who made those trips and made it to people's homes to kind of bridge those gaps and barriers. So I think one thing I really took away from my experience is that sometimes what seem like the most complex problems in health often have really simple solutions. A lot of times that comes down to people who are wonderful resources and strengthening just basic primary health systems.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting, and I'm glad it's this opportunity, this fellowship that we support. It's meant to be two-way, where you contribute and you learn, and it seems that was like a really true exchange here. We're closing in on time, so the last question I just wanted to ask Minnie is, what advice would you give to someone who's interested in volunteering abroad?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you said earlier. Do your research. I think that's step number one. You owe it to, the people that you'll be working with, the communities you'll be working with. You also owe it to yourself to do that research and make sure that you're going in prepared. Another thing I would recommend is, this seems obvious, but really putting a lot of effort into learning the language of the area and the region that you'll be in. It was so important for me during my gap year to not only communicate with the women and local community members who we were serving or who were part of the intervention, but also just my coworkers, the people who were also at my organization. I felt like the kind of the way for an immersive experience like that to be really meaningful is by making relationships with the people that you were, experiencing it with, and that's really hard to do when there are communication barriers. And I think my last piece of advice is not really advice, more of sort of something to keep in mind. I think it's worth anticipating that this experience will be hard no matter what, no matter where you go, no matter what project you do. It'll probably be hard at first, and that's because you're going outside of your comfort zone. You're doing something a little uncomfortable. I think it took me a few weeks to about a month to feel like I was really settled into my life in Lima, where I lived, who I was spending time with, how I was, what roles I was playing in my project and on my team. But I think keeping an open mind, being open to all the new people that you'll meet, especially because you'll need a strong support system when you're living alone in a new place for the first time. I think that will take you really far during your experience abroad.
Thank you so much. Yeah, language is key. If knowing the language helps you build those relationships, being open and flexible, because like you said, it will be challenging, but it's those challenging things that help you grow. So thank you so much for that, Minnie. I really appreciate you sharing your experience. And if you would all like to learn more about Minnie's project or other fellows, please check out our foundation blog. I put the URL here. I'll put my contact information. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to call or email me. I'm happy to talk about the experience. And if anyone has any questions right now, please feel free to chat them in. We're happy to answer any questions right now. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any questions right now. So I want to thank everyone for joining us.
One just came in.
Oh, okay, sure.
Just slipped in. Let's see. There's a question about, are fee waivers available for low income applicants? And she has a second part to the question, but if you want to address that.
Sure. So right now we don't have a waiver for the application fee, simply because it does take a lot of work for us to read all the applications and put in the time that each fellow deserves. So we don't have a waiver yet. Certainly, if someone were to receive the fellowship, they could use some of the funds to as a reimbursement, if you will.
And then the second part of the question is the 50% is dispersed at the start of the project and then 50% at the end, or really how is that? If you could talk more about how the disbursement is structured, and then if so, how do low income applicants bridge that payout gap while abroad?
Sure, that's a great question. So the reason that we did it in 2 steps is simply for accountability. As soon as the fellow is abroad, I will reach out to their supervisor to ensure that they are abroad. We are able to transfer funds directly into a fellow's bank account, and then the final portion of the award is given within 30 days of the project end date. Now, with that said, we are a bit flexible. So if someone wanted to have 3 disbursements, we can do that. We've just historically always done it in 2 disbursements and for accountability purposes, but we certainly understand that people may need the funds earlier. And so we're happy to work with each individual fellow on a schedule that will work best for them. All right, well, if there's no other questions at this time, I know we're at time, so please feel free to reach out to me, and thank you everyone for joining. Stephanie for looking at the chat, monitoring that, and Minnie also, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, bye everybody.